Hey everybody, welcome back to Manic Energy. This is Ryan Swore. I'm joined today by Rob Unzen. Rob and I work together. Rob, appreciate you being here. I'm excited for you to demystify the great and scary art of human resources. So look forward to getting into it with you. I'm Ryan Swore, and this is Manic Energy, the podcast that dives into the fast-moving world of energy, business, and the people powering it all. From bold ideas to real-world innovation, we're talking breakthroughs, market moves, and the community shaping what's next. Whether you're building for the future or just here for the fun, welcome to the chaos. So Rob, thanks again for joining us. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background. Let our listeners know sort of where you come from, what you've done.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me on the show today. I've worked most of my career in human resources or related work. So I started at a healthcare staffing agency. So basically we did staffing for home healthcare and some medical facilities. So working in recruiting and just general HR and some office administration. So really it was a kind of a jack of all trades running an office in the Duluth, Minnesota area. I moved into corporate HR, which was a bit of a change in the retail environment, and started kind of doing HR generalist work, so similar to what I had done, except a little bit more focus in HR. In that job, I ultimately moved into an HR leadership role as an HR manager. After that job, I landed at Lake Spirit Consulting, where I've now been the last 8 years. I started in HR at Lake Spirit Consulting, eventually moved into the HR director role, leading HR, as part of the former parent company, Shawcor. They moved me into or promoted me into a role where I oversaw all recruiting for North America for Shawcor. So in addition to running the HR team for Lake Spirit Consulting, business unit at the time, I was running all of recruiting for North America, and so that was an interesting experience. Really got to see what the HR world and recruiting world was like outside of the U.S. So there was work in Canada and even Mexico as well. So that was a great experience. I have since, just in the last year, moved into the vice president of operations role, where I now still oversee HR, and then also oversee marketing, IT, and our safety team. So that's really the high level.
All sounds pretty easy.
Yeah, just yeah, it's a lot of fun. So
Nice.
Can I ask a question to bring it back a little bit? Like, was there anything that inspired you to go into HR? Did it just happen?
Yeah, really good question. I think, I actually really, I had a history degree as what I went to school for, and I liked some of the reading and there was a lot of analysis and it's kind of a precursor for people to go into law school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people they're going to law school, go for English, or they go for history, or they do something similar. And so I was really thinking about law school at the time. And so then I realized that HR has a lot of similarities to what people do when they get into employment law. And so I like that side of it first.
Mm-hmm.
I like being a people person though too. And I said, I like recruiting, I like talking to people. And so I thought that being a lawyer might be it wasn't quite the avenue that I wanted. I'm like, I think that HR gives me a little bit of just a little sprinkle of the legal side that I think I like, but then more of the people and interacting with people in a way that I'd like to do. So, yeah.
So I think of human resources, HR, right? I think of the principal's office or the scary dungeon you've got to walk into. I've worked at a lot of jobs where you're in trouble if you have to talk to HR. And I feel like, the team, at least at LSC, has done a really good job of setting up an open environment where people feel safe to come and have conversations. I've even seen where an individual really trusts, respects, and likes their leader, but still goes to HR with questions before even their leader. And it just kind of amazes me. And I think we'd love it to be that way all the time. So what are some of the things that, you'd recommend for employers with respect to setting up an HR team so that it's an open environment that people want to come talk to?
Yeah.
And even employees, if they work in that scary environment, or what are they looking for?
Yeah, I think just to take it back a little bit, to your point on how HR is viewed, I can't remember the amount of times that I've shown up at a company party or even a non-party. I just see an employee in public, whether it's at a bar or restaurant, and the first comment is, "Oh no, HR's here," right? So like there is a stereotype, and everyone makes fun of it. And I think most people are making fun of it, but there is really, I think, in some companies, a culture where HR is viewed as the principal's office, is viewed as, that they hammer the people for screwing up a little bit, right? So I think one of the things that HR needs to be proactive in getting involved and interacting more with the business, and not just being the group that transactionally deals with the problem once it pops up. So get involved before a problem is so big. So if there's performance issues, really take the time to partner with the team, partner with the leaders, make sure that you're visible and that you're available for things that are positive too. So things like talking about benefits, talking about total rewards, talking about resources for employees, and not just being an employee relations hub where people show up when the worst things have happened, or when you're at a point where there's no turning back from a termination, for example. And so I think that's one of the things. And so people can say, well, leaders need to pull HR, and well, HR really needs to be proactive first, because people don't understand what HR is other than you're the people who are going to help me hire and fire. And so you as HR professionals need to show the business you're more than that.
And should employees feel comfortable like accessing this group or resources? I mean, regardless of how well established that team is at a company.
Yeah, I think at our company, I would say the answer is yes. But I think in general, in a lot of companies, I don't know, because to me, HR isn't always the easiest group to get to. And I think part of it is it's a misunderstanding with HR. So I think people think of HR, it's bad, they're just dealing with this. What oftentimes happens is HR is under-resourced and too much burdens put on them. So everything that's people related seems to fall into HR. So every initiative at every company, and anytime there's a problem, anytime there's a mass hiring, anything like that, the HR is pulled into it. And sometimes it lacks prioritization or direction. And so then what happens is people go to HR and they get short transactional answers. They're not really helpful. They're passing them on to a third-party resource for benefits or for whatever it might be. And so I think people should feel more comfortable, because HR it shouldn't feel scary, but at times HR does feel like it's unapproachable, because I don't think that has enough resources at times.
Yeah, I heard you say, you show up at a party or wherever and people say, "Oh no, HR is here." I can tell that I've really changed, like where I'm at in my life. I must be getting older, because I usually think, "Oh, thank goodness HR's here." Like maybe being a business owner does that to you, but it's like, oh wow, that's how I feel now.
Yeah, I have to remind people that after hours you can drink with HR.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Like, let's not push the envelope here. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that's all really good. In terms of I think we probably have a lot of job seekers out there, people that might be looking for employment or looking to change employment in jobs, or even career field changes. Any recommendations for job seekers and what they should look for in employers?
Yeah, I think it's easy to make the mistake of the grass is always green on the other side, and I know it's a bit cliche, but it is important that people really do their due diligence to make sure that the fit's right for them. And so what I mean by that is, take the time to do your research, even if you're unhappy with an employer. Take the time to prep. So what I mean by that too is, make sure your resume is up to date. You're using tools like LinkedIn, your profile. If you're looking for an employer that you can tell does a lot of hiring on LinkedIn, and that is the case with a lot of jobs today. Not just what people used to think were the higher level professional jobs. It's a lot of places, roles are being posted and on LinkedIn, and employers are looking there. But I think, making sure that you're prepped with your online presence, that's a big piece of it. But I think that also taking the time to network, get out in the community. You can do that through some of these online resources now. You need to be an advocate for yourself. You need to figure out, are there groups, or are there organizations that I can get involved with that could help me get a leg up in my job search? And then, like I said, just making sure that your online presence is strong, and that you have, a good network of references for when the time comes to help you get that job.
What are some of the things you maybe should look for? So you get to that point, right? You get your online presence established. You're trying to network. Are there certain qualities? Like, everybody's looking for, maybe a rewarding place to work, or a job that they love, as opposed to, a job they dislike going to. Would you have any advice for people on, maybe some of the elements they should be looking for in a prospective employer, so they got to the point of an interview, and I've always felt like, certainly not always, but now I'd like to think that I would feel like I'm interviewing the company as much as they'd be interviewing me. Like, is this a place that I want to really spend, with how much, where I work probably 80% of my life, or is this a place where I'm really going to dread going to? What are some of the things, you'd recommend people look for?
Yeah, I think one of the things is, I think it depends on where you are in your life, right? So I like to say, for me, flexibility matters, because I've got elementary, middle school aged kids, and so I want to be involved in their lives. So I'll work hard, but I need to be able to sometimes, leave at 4:00. To me, that matters. And so really you got to think about what you're looking for in your career. So, because not to some people, that's everything. And some people, their career is everything. So what am I looking for? Am I looking for career advancement? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to move up. Is that what's motivating me? Is it motivating me to have a combination of maybe career advancement and being able to have some semblance of a personal life? And so figuring out what you are going to prioritize, and then making sure that you're not afraid to ask some of the questions in the interview, even if it kicks you out of the interview process. I had a job interview years ago now where I know that me disclosing that I wasn't willing to spend every other week traveling was the reason I didn't get the job. I was for sure their top candidate, and I could have said, hey, I might be open to this, but you know what? The reality is you're setting yourself up for failure, and you don't want to do that to yourself, and you don't want to put them in a bad position to have. It's bad for everybody. So I think to me, think about what you want out of an employer, and where you want to be in your career, in your life, and then make sure that when you get your opportunity to ask those questions in the interview, that you follow up with those questions. So if it's around flexibility, if it's around career advancement, if it's a little bit of both, those are probably I keep saying those ones because those are the two most common, I think, that pop up in interviews.
So I want to go back to something you said about when you're entering a room to be interviewed, that you feel as though you want it to be as if you're interviewing the company as well.
Mm-hmm.
What has changed? Have you seen any trends? Because I feel like that's kind of a newer concept where, employees have maybe a little bit more, I don't want to say control, but for lack of a better
choice, maybe.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. And it has very much changed, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So a decade ago, most people, I would say, walked in interviews and were doing what I had described not to do, which is was not being fully transparent because they just wanted to get that job. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I will figure it out. Maybe they'll be more flexible than what they're saying. Maybe we can work it out. Maybe I'll be more willing to work longer hours than I thought. And so now what comes in is employees, and maybe it's generational. I think it's a combination. I think it's probably generational. It's probably a little bit more supply and demand. Mm-hmm. There are more, in general, there's more employees still, even though it's slowed down a little bit, there's more employers with job openings than employees looking for jobs. So people are more willing in interviews to ask about, what can you do for me? Like, mm-hmm. Is this, so that's what you're offering. So could you give me more paid time off? Could you be more flexible? And they're just willing to be a much more direct and straightforward with it. And, I think it sometimes catches people like myself. For a while, it would catch people like myself off guard, because it was almost taboo to do that to an employer before. And I think that people that are even a little bit older than me really think that's, mm-hmm. So a hiring manager who is even older than me might go, that's really bad. That's bad. So they almost judge them for asking that. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, I think it's a good trend overall, because the transparency in the interview process is, we got to stop worrying about, was I a little bit bothered that they asked for that kind of flexibility? It's like, no, let's be transparent. Let's not make this overly formal where we're acting, because that's what an interview was before. It was acting. It was somebody playing a character of themselves and
who they think they want you to
who
be.
they think you want to be, and then the employer is acting like, and you're not actually connecting.
Yep.
You want to take the time to connect and understand what is it that's driving this person, what does this place need, and then you're going to find out if it actually can work. And so we need to get there.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It bodes well for the business as well. So when the employee's happy, I think there's probably a direct correlation to productivity, and then everybody wins. So. No, that's really interesting and a good
better culture for the
yes,
company.
totally.
And I mean, in at least from my perspective, I'd love if every employee stayed with the company forever. Not forever, that's a long time, but through their working career. Like, that's the dream, right? You hire somebody, they love what the business does and what you stand for, and they get attached to it, and you love, trust, and respect them as an employee. You develop that mutual sort of relationship, and you're able to give them the career growth that they want, and basically get success on both sides. You certainly don't want somebody to come in and say, this is not the book of goods I was promised, and then 6 months later leave. That's really disruptive, really challenging. And I think I love the transparency, because it probably sets you up for success more likely. What about if we flip the script a little bit and talk about the employer in the interview process? I mean, you kind of covered that a little bit, but what types of resources? You said LinkedIn. Are there other things? I mean, I come from a background where, first of all, I've sat in that interview and I never would have thought to say, wait a second, this job pays what per hour? I think it should pay this. Like you said, it was taboo. But I also came from a background where it was like, I was on, what was it, like monster.com? I can't remember now. It was like on there looking for employees, trying to hire them, because we didn't have an HR team. We didn't have recruiters and didn't really know what to do. And what I resorted to was like going to the university, just kind of walking around and waiting until I ran into somebody that seemed like they would fit in with the culture and be willing to do the job. I was like, hey, what are you doing with your career? What are you thinking you're doing with your life? Mostly history majors is my favorite target. Long story short, like, I didn't really know what the resources were. So I'm sure there's probably small business owners or, people out there that are new to the human resources realm. Like, what types of platforms should they use, or things, tools can they use? Yeah,
it's an interesting question. And the answer varies quite a bit based on the type of role that you're looking for. And what I mean by that is, excuse me. So in LinkedIn is really, it's a professional network, and it's obviously gotten very, very large over time. There is a cost there. You can do it for fairly cheap to spending quite a bit of money. And so you really have to think about, is your audience for the type of role you're posting on LinkedIn? And if they are, great. LinkedIn is a great resource for that. But if they're not, there's several other resources. So Indeed tends to have a very wide reach, and you can do anything from non-paid postings to paid postings, and you can increase the visibility of your paid posting by paying incrementally more money. And you can do it for very short periods of time up to extended periods of time. That's one good one. Even Facebook, people have started using Facebook more often for those kinds of for certain postings when you're looking for certain demographics of people, especially young people. And then the colleges have their own platforms, and so when we're looking at the college demographic too, that is another group where we get a lot of traction from posting on those sites. Typically, there's restrictions around those types of postings, but even small employers can use a lot of these same the same resources we do, and they can just scale up and down based on their need. And they can, if it's a critical need, they can be willing to spend a little bit more money. They don't have to necessarily get locked into contracts and subscriptions to use these platforms.
Makes sense. You mentioned earlier, you kind of mentioned, you brought up the term benefits. So what are some of I think we talked a little bit about attracting employees to the business as well. So whether you're an employee or your employer setting this up, I think everybody knows the traditional benefits, healthcare, 401k, how much vacation you have, perhaps even bonus programs. What are some of the ancillary benefits that employers can offer maybe to attract a workforce or even connect better with today's workforce.
Yeah.
That seems to have higher demands or more choice, I think, as we said.
Yeah, and I think and I'll mention some of those in a moment here. I think the key for employers and employees is still the core. The health insurance in today's world is critical. It's really a critical piece of total compensation. Health insurance prices are rising, and health insurance costs in general is going up through the roof. And I think that a lot of times younger people in the workforce who haven't experienced yet can't fully appreciate that, where people like myself and both of you who've been around for a bit in the workforce can see how that works. And so always look at that and 401k as the first two things. We realize though that people are looking for additional cool benefits, things that are unique. And so we have focused on things like wellness. So paid wellness incentives and flexibility in the workforce. And then doing things that we've got a lot of young families that work for us. And so we looked at, okay, we know a lot of people are getting braces. So we added on a cool benefit where we pay more for kids to get braces than I think any other employer that I've talked to around here. And our employees keep saying that from when they go to the dentist or the orthodontics, and they keep being told, hey, how do you get this kind of benefit? And so what we've tried to do is target some of those things around the group that's working for us today. And I think that I would encourage other employers to do the same. We've also looked at our EAP and we said, you know what? We've had a lot of questions around mental health and people needing more mental health care. So we increased our free mental health visits through our EAP. And so the company pays a little bit more money for that, but we know that our employees then are, we talk about the importance of mental health, but we need to know, okay, are we willing to stand behind that? And so we, as a company, said, we're going to pay a little more money to make sure that people can get those extra visits, free visits to get established with a mental health practitioner.
Got a question on like the total benefits package. I think, previously it was the basics, as you had mentioned, maybe dental, medical, but over the years you've seen the trend where we have to really connect with the people you're trying to recruit. So we've added maybe mental health, wellness programs, stuff like that. Has it been difficult, maybe not in this role, but like in previous roles, as those benefits packages are getting more robust, to get leadership buy-in on increasing that? Because that is a bit of a culture change. Maybe there's business costs associated with it.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think at Lake Spirit Consulting, we have a strong benefits plan. We know that because we benchmark it all the time, and we see where it's at, and so we know it's near the top of the industry. I think that yes, it's a real thing that I've seen in other employers. What we've talked about is we have spent a lot of time talking about kind of the families of our company, and we see the value and the appreciation that the employees have shown, and so we have stuck with plans that are fairly robust, and I would say kind of progressive for benefits purposes. And so yeah, I mean it's a question that a lot of employers have to ask regularly. We've been fortunate that up to this date to be able to provide really great benefits at Lake Spirit Consulting though.
I think there's a lot more, I mean, from just beyond the cost perspective. I think there's a lot of really low cost, potentially high impact, at least for certain groups, benefits that can be offered. I mean, we were the most, we were one of the most rigid organizations about, what time you got to work, what time you had to be there until, and you couldn't work remotely. I mean, I remember putting in 40 hours the week my daughter was born and from home, and I still had to use 40 hours of vacation because I wasn't at the office, right? Despite the fact that I was doing the exact same thing because I was doing it from home. And that's just the culture we were in. And I think there's benefits of that, like because it really inspired and motivated people to get together. And I'm a huge advocate for connecting with individuals, but there was a cost to it as well, certainly.
Yeah.
I think though that there's a lot of maybe less expensive things that can be added. So flexibility is really what I'm getting at. Flexibility, maybe going and getting coffee with somebody, taking the time to figure out in advance when's their birthday, and then showing up the morning of their birthday and doing something nice for them, whatever that may be, even if it's just a simple card or a cup of coffee again. I like a lot of coffee, so I think there's little things that you can do that are low cost that anybody can do, right? And can be meaningful because it's all about showing that you care, right? What did I miss? Are there any other types of low cost, potentially high impact sort of benefits that employers can offer that aren't things like we need to shop our health insurance or, how do we change our plan? That's a very expensive thing to do. Speaking from experience there.
Yeah. To your point, I mean, all employers should be looking at their suite of benefits and making sure that they're competitive and that they're serving the employees that work for the company. But to your point, I mean, and I didn't really dive into it much, but in the flexibility, I mean, I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that a ton of employers have pulled people back to the offices full time, part time, and we have encouraged and we have found ways to say, you know what, we need to get the groups together a little bit more. There needs to be opportunity to collaborate. But I think we've used a lot more of the carrot than the stick approach. And I think that's been something that's been appealing to the candidates we've been recruiting, to our retention and engagement of current employees. And we've heard that. We've heard that a lot through anecdotal conversations, through our engagement survey that we do. Through our recruiting practices, we talk to candidates. And so that is something where the trick and the challenge has been for employers is how do you offer flexibilities and ensure that whatever product or service that you sell isn't impacted in a negative way. And I think so far we have done a fairly effective job in balancing those things. And so that's just been a critical piece for us.
And I think it's probably pretty hard for employers of more, I guess you'd call it traditionally blue collared workforce where it's manufacturing. You can't work remotely. You can't have flexible work environment. And so I think it's probably a lot harder, right?
Yeah, and I think even for us, I mean, the challenge too is equity within, because we have roles that are able to be more flexible than others. And so then for the people that have to travel more often for work, how do you give them a similar opportunity? And I think that's something that I think we've done that we've really worked hard to try to offer flexibility whenever we have the opportunity for different job types.
Makes sense. You mentioned mental health, and to me, it's a bit of a new concept in the workplace, and still trying to wrap my head around, whether it's like regulatory requirement, following the law, or a good idea to pay attention to this subject. Can you maybe educate both myself and our listeners a little bit on sort of what that means in the workplace, what employees can expect, and or what employers should be doing around the subject?
Yeah, mental health. I think really during COVID, it took off as something that was I would call it front and center all over the place. Whether it was commercials, whether it was employers talking about their support of mental health, because people were obviously struggling more at that time with isolation, and other things, and so most of the mental health push is with employers. I think at the time was a reaction to the understanding that employees and people needed it and needed the support, needed the help. I mean, there are legal requirements around accommodating employees who are struggling with any sort of or many types of health related things, and including mental health. And so that falls under kind of, you can FMLA and Americans with Disability Act. And so there's meaning. Just to summarize that, you may, as an employer, you should provide reasonable accommodations to give people the help, to allow people the time to get the professional help they need. And so that's really summarizing it up. But then there's the other side of where you talk about, it's really the employer realizing that, from a culture perspective and just from what our employees are asking for, it's the right thing to do. We want to take care of our employees, and employees were asking for it. So I think that's been the reaction of a lot of companies. That was our reaction, was more based on that than any legal requirement. And so that's why I said earlier, we increased our support and what we pay for visits for employees. We've continued to look at, is there other options we can do through our health insurance? There are some limitations there. There are also, one of the other barriers is, employers can do a lot of things, and we're continuing to look for things. But the reality is there's still an issue in this country where there isn't enough mental health practitioners, professional mental health practitioners, for people to go see when they need to see it, especially when they're having mental health crisis. And then there's also health insurance and and providers, the way the reimbursement works, there's not a lot of incentive in this country for mental health support. So employers can do a lot of things, and we are really pushing it, but there's also limitations to what we can do without a lot of changes in this country.
So I see almost like two components to the mental health benefits, I guess. One is what HR, the package, the programs that are offered. The other part is like supervisors, managers, and leadership play a role in supporting that or allowing their employees to take advantage or take the time they need or what have you. But have you experienced any sort of challenges when rolling out these programs or any sort of pushback from leadership, or has training been part of the program rollout?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's always a culture shock when you change, like what Ryan was talking about earlier about, rigid work hours or things like that. And I think similarly, when you're saying, hey, you know what, people are going to leave early some days to go to a counseling session, and they may or may not even disclose that, first of all. But if they are, that's something that there's been stigma attached to people even acknowledging that they have a mental health thing going on. Like, I'm dealing with clinical depression or anxiety or whatever it might be. And so that is something that we've spent time. We've had trainings at our company around mental health. We've had several. We did several of them, especially during the COVID years. But even since then, we've incorporated into conversations when HR has been made aware of individuals struggling, and supervisors. The nice thing is they usually come and ask for help. We have helped guide them on how to offer a reasonable of flexibility around people who just similarly. I mean, you wouldn't question somebody dealing with a severe, a knee injury or cancer or something like that. But so you want to teach them, okay, here are the things, here's how you can, employees still need to be accountable to trying to work around the schedule a little bit. And so it really is an interactive process.
Yep.
But you really want to show supervisors the importance of being supportive. And I think we have a pretty good culture of that.
And I think a lot of people, myself included, historically, maybe undervalue or overlook the cost of recruiting, the cost of finding new talent and training people in, right? And what I mean by that is when you're as an employer, you maybe feed that stigma or you don't create that open environment. I mean, ultimately what people do is they don't succeed in the role, right? They leave, either they're forced out of the business or they exit on their own accord. And as an employer, you're actually then in a worse spot than you usually would have been. I mean, I like to think of employees like, they're people you're with every day and you need to have care for them. And if you do that and you show that, they'll give it back to you in spades. At least that's been my experience 9 times out of 10. So, it's really, I think it behooves the employer to invest the time and energy into being flexible. Even if you're in a manufacturing position where the person's punching out early and you've got to shut a production line down, or you've got to get somebody else come in on overtime or somebody else stay over or do it yourself. Like it seems like a big cost to do that, but the reality is it's even the best financial decision because the cost of turnover is immense and probably the biggest cost. Can you maybe give our listeners an example of you must have 1,000 interesting stories being, with a career in human resources, but maybe an example of what good looks like with respect to mental health and perhaps maybe some experiences where employers didn't do the right thing and what in fact impact or effect that can have on a person or, their livelihood or their family.
Yeah. I think to me, good looks like, having that dialogue with the employee as a supervisor and taking the time to understand what they're dealing with, try to show some empathy, first of all. And because there's times when, you might not be able to give the employee every single thing they ask for around flexibility or whatever it might be. But if you can say, hey, if this isn't, I see where you're coming from. What can I do? And then you kind of, it's almost like a informal, it's not a negotiation, but if you just treat them like, hey, let's talk about this. I want to support you, but can you help? How can we make this work where you can still do some of these things, or maybe we can hand off some of that for now, but but showing that level of empathy and having that conversation is the key. And it's really that simple. It is. And I've seen it work over and over again. And then people feel appreciated. They feel heard. They feel like you understand what they're dealing with. And then they also are more them as an employee is more willing to say, you know what, I'm struggling. I need this, but I'm going to do everything I can to still help my employer. Or on the flip side, and I've seen this several times across every employer, is that and this isn't even the majority by any means, but I've seen it, and I've seen it with mental health too. And where what happens is the employee says, I'm gonna need to miss this time for this, and I've got all this stuff going on, or maybe they're a little bit vague even, and the supervisor decides that they're going to play hardball and say, well, I need you to do this. So they don't even take the time to understand what the employee is dealing with. They don't take the time to show empathy. And they say, well, okay, so you need to leave at 4. Well, I need you here till 3:30 then. So please stay here till 3:30. And it just becomes this rigid power struggle. And I think that's what oftentimes you see with, maybe immature leaders who haven't done it for a while, or people who shouldn't have ever been in leadership to begin with. Because there's a level of you can have accountability and tell people what you need from them and work that out. But I've seen an example where leaders have wanted to terminate people right away because I can't deal with this. I can't deal with this person missing their job. And it's just not the right answer. And especially if it's somebody who's proven themselves for a period of time and they're just dealing with something, even if it's for months or a year or more. I mean, I think there's got to be a level of we're still human here and showing some empathy.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think we've in terms of like, I don't know, thinking about how do you know if you're wrestling with a mental health thing? I mean, we're not medical professionals. I'm not asking to weigh on that, but any experience with that and maybe recognizing when you need help and what those signs can look like, or I mean, you must have some experience with it. So
yeah, you mean like as in was this when an individual's wrestling or for a supervisor to identify?
No, individual.
Okay. Yeah, I think when people, I mean,
or even any personal experiences with it, or like things you've witnessed happen.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think, I mean, I'm obviously not a clinician myself, but I think that, from what I've seen and just my own experience, that people have different drivers of there's a difference between stress or feeling down and then more long-term, clinical depression, clinical anxiety, other mental health conditions. And so for me, I had an experience when, I wouldn't say that I've dealt with any, long-term mental health. But, I had a time when I needed flexibility from my employer. I had when I had the passing of my child, my second child, from a congenital heart defect. And when that happened, or before it happened, he was very ill for extended period of time. I needed a lot of flexibility. I'm sure, I know in hindsight that I was obviously dealing with some mental health struggles myself during that time, mostly grief, I'd say. But, some of that turns into longer term, depression, anxiety. And so I think that for me, it wasn't, there was no obvious transition. It was just that, you're less focused on work. You're less motivated. You don't, there's just a lot of those types of things that you kind of see come up. And I think that's common among people though that deal with mental health. And oftentimes if you help them work through it, they get through to the other end and they're back to where they were and probably more loyal of an employee.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, is it, was there an employee assistance program or anything that helped you with that? Or I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, no, good question. So it was a previous employer and we did have a similar employee assistance program to what we have today. And so my wife and I did grief counseling sessions, so some free sessions. We continued to go there for a little while. I felt like that was very helpful, and we appreciated that the employer did that. We had some benefits that they offered too, where they kind of give a similar flexibility, extended leave, kind of like we've done for people who struggle with similar situations. And then, you talk about the role of the supervisor. I think in that case, the biggest thing for me was bigger than all of that was having a leader who was empathetic and who was willing to go to bat for me and to do what it took to help me get to the other end, because she saw me as somebody who, she cared about and overall, I think thought was a good employee. And she was willing to do, whatever she could within and even kind of stretch policy a little bit maybe to help me out. So that was really appreciated.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I wonder if like we kind of spanned into mental health, and it's just so new of a topic to me. I know we covered it for a long time, but Still trying to get my own mind around it and making sure that we're doing all the right things or the most that we can possibly do. What are some of the other trends you might see upcoming? Like what don't we see yet? Other things that, of course, COVID, the pandemic brought on a lot of new stuff. If you had your crystal ball in the next, let's call it the mid-range horizon, 1 to 5 years, what can employers or even employees expect? At least in your best guess, nobody knows for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to know across many areas, but I do think that AI will have such a huge role it already does with candidate job seeking, with the way that employers are leveraging it to look at candidates to work through just the way that they work through everyday tasks at companies, and so and I think that is an area where employers are going to continue to leverage AI, but we've also need to put some guardrails around it. And I'm not talking about the futuristic AIs taking over the world stuff. I'm talking just about quality of work, making sure that you're getting what you think you are from a person.
That's interesting.
From candidates, and so it's going to be really thinking through. And then if you offer services like we do, making sure that you have quality in place to ensure that you're passing on stuff that has been properly vetted, which are things that we are working on in HR and IT and across the company. And I think that you can't downplay the role that AI will have. I think that on a benefits front, there'll continue to be changes. The cost of healthcare in this country continues. I mean, there's been plateaued for a short period, but continues to be something where employers and the country as a whole needs to get creative around how we meet the rising demands for healthcare, and yet the cost is unsustainable across many places.
In one that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is pay transparency, right? You talked about generational effects, like this concept of pay transparency. Everybody knows what everybody makes. I mean, it makes it feel like in a way equitable and fair. It really puts the onus on the employer to set the system up the right way where you're rewarding, either the most knowledgeable, the hardest working, or if it's valued, the most experienced individuals. How do you navigate that landscape? Do you think that's going to change? Like there's going to be more and more demand for that, right?
Yeah, of course. I should have brought that one up. That was probably the most obvious one here.
AI for sure is like, I wasn't even thinking AI. So as soon as you said it, I was like,
and places like places like Minnesota, for example, that's now the law of the land. So like some of the several states in this country have it where when you post a job, you have to post a range. And so that's a little different than all pay transparency, but it kind of in some ways necessitates that. But I think pay transparency is a good practice. I think it's good to not hide that. I know, again, a decade ago even, that was a bit taboo to talk about pay. There was a lot of companies that had policies and procedures around disclosing pay. And I think that now it's kind of, we've gone the opposite. The floodgates are wide open, and employers are trying to keep up with how do we train supervisors, managers, leaders at companies, and employees on how we advertise pay and how you move up on the pay scale. So, for example, in HR, this is kind of getting nitty gritty, but there's a practice where you post ranges, right? In general, people don't make at the top of ranges in most employers. You can look at the data across the board, and they just don't. And yet, as soon as you post a range, someone with any level of experience is saying, I'd like that top end of that range. And so
an employee in the business.
The employee in the business and candidates. So it's both. And so you have to know, okay, now how do we educate people on, so you have to have a clear philosophy, which is what we've established, and we've continued to, and we're working through, I think the part that we're playing catch up on a little bit is just the communication and education on, okay, how do we equitably how do we equitably try and pay our employees? And so not only is there scales, but then there's different regions where the scales can be different. So if you're looking at a job posted if you're in New York City, for example, or LA, the pay is much higher. So you're going to oftentimes you're going to see different pay range. So someone might see that range and they might be in Minneapolis and go, why am I not paid that much? I saw a posting for this job. This is my job. And so there's a lot of things to teach, and it's tough to navigate.
Does the remote flexibility, what is
Oh yeah.
How does that, I mean, like, how do you navigate that even?
And a lot of employers dealt with that during COVID. And so,
Sure.
and still deal with it today. So if people were, if it was a job that's in Houston, or if it's
Sure.
in LA, and they're working remotely, and they're in a region that rural northern Minnesota, they might be paid, or the scale should be lower, but they might be getting paid those wages. Well, now employers have kind of changed that a bit more and said, okay, a lot of companies have put some procedures and some policies even around that to kind of right size that. But that's still a major thing that we're continuing to work through. And I think that the way that we've got to do it as our company is to continue to communicate and to make it as clear and transparent about how you move along the pay scale.
The hard part is there's always inequities, right?
No matter what.
Of any company with any size. I mean, if you've got 3 people, you can usually balance it. But once you start to get, that larger small business or medium, there will be inequities that exist. Meaning you've got a person that's been there for 4 years and isn't contributing nearly the value that the person that's been there for 12 months is. That happens. Yet the compensation is different. And so, making it feel fair to all employees while being transparent, instead of, because sometimes it takes years to catch that up. It takes time to get that right. Or even recognize there might be an issue where the employees recognize it right away and you don't see it as a leader, as an organization. So I think there's some dangers, but I love what you said there about establishing and making clear what your philosophy is so that people understand it. And I think as long as you do that and then stick to it, and I know we're trying to do that, it's going to be, I think it'll always be try. I don't think it's ever, hey, you solved this. But just, it was certainly a big topic on my mind. So I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah. Just one last comment on that. You mentioned that, I don't want to dive into all the inequity stuff, but I think that one thing that's tough for employers, I've seen across from many employers, the ones I've worked at and others, is that you talked earlier about when somebody leaves an organization and they're an employee who has skills, or they retire, or that something happens where they leave and you have to fill it. Oftentimes you're filling it with someone who's a seasoned employee and you don't always know what you're going to get. So you pay based on what you think you're going to get. And then sometimes they oversold themselves, or maybe you just didn't vet it well enough. It's hard to do in that process. But either way, you then have somebody who you're paying quite a bit more potentially than someone who doesn't have as much experience, but they might be a stronger person. Now is your answer. So then you have to decide as an employer, is your answer to overpay everybody now, based on the market. And then what does that do for the business? Or do you just live with the fact that you have an inequity for a while, or there's a lot, it's just a tough situation at times. So
that makes sense. I love that. I love that bias you brought up. I mean, I think you're the first one to educate me in this. And I was like, you're so right. I did that all the time. I never really knew about it. Like, Rob, one time I think educated me on the bias that, when you've got an employee or internal candidates applying for a position internally, and then external candidates applying for a position, you sort of have a bias towards the external because you don't know. There's an unknown. And so you kind of, especially if you're an optimist like me, you say, wow,
that
this person seems phenomenal. Well, you know all the strengths and weaknesses of the individual. So you sort of naturally go in with those premonition. Like, oh, okay. You're kind of predisposed to that. Like, they're not going to be as strong with this. And I kind of really need that, whereas this other candidate, they seemed great, but you're basing that off of, a couple interactions or that acting gig. And then normally what happens is you find out, wow, there were a ton of blind spots. And I think it's really important to be cognizant of those. I've tried really hard over time. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, I think it's trickled through the organization. I mean, we can statistically show that recently, in recent years, we have done and there's a lot of reasons for this, I think, but that we've done a better job, a good job, I would say, of promoting from within into leadership roles more than we used to.
Yeah, I love tracking that. Right? What is the percentage? Who's being promoted? When is it happening? And let's celebrate that. I think that was a pretty cool ad. Well, Rob, really appreciate you joining us. I have a feeling we're close to the end of our time. I think we could go on with this subject forever. A very long time. I keep saying forever.
HR?
Who knew HR could be exciting? But I mean, the reality is, to me, it's Rob knew.
Right.
So that's why he got his history degree, because he knew HR was going to be phenomenal. I love it. I got a business degree because I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I cannot judge. But I mean, to me, what it's really all about is we're trying to make better culture, a more rewarding experience for employees, because we feel it's going to come back in spades. And I think the more we talk about these things, and the more any employer does for that matter, the better served they'll be. I mean, I don't think you'd ever regret it in any business, because these are the types of things that build culture, and culture is king. So I really appreciate you sharing all your years of experience with us and our listeners. And I hope we can have you back sometime. We'll dive into some of these topics even more.
Yeah, glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Rob.
Appreciate it. That's a wrap on this episode of Manic Energy, where the only constant is change. If you're fired up, do us a solid. Follow the show, leave a quick review, or send it to a friend. Got questions, ideas, or a topic you want us to dig into? Drop us a line at the link in the show description. Thanks for riding the current with us. Until next time, stay charged.